Shukran sana Lulu na Jeff. Bila shaka tumepata hisia nyingi sana kutoka kwa Wakenya walio katika maeneo tofauti tofauti hapa nchini. Pia tumepata hisia za wale ambao tunao hapa katika studio kama wale ni wataalam, na nina nafasi sasa tuweze kupata ufafanuzi zaidi kuhusiana na baadhi ya masuala ambayo yameibuka, na amejiunga nasi katika studio mbunge wa Kiharu Ndindi Nyoro, ambaye pia ni mwenyekiti wa kamati ya bunge inayoshughulikia masuala ya bajeti, na kamati yake bila shaka ni kamati ambayo ni muhimu sana katika mfumo mzima wa kutayarisha bajeti. Na Mheshimiwa Ndindi Nyoro, kama umewasikiliza vizuri wa Kenya wakijieleza kule maeneo ya Kisumu, wakijieleza kule maeneo ya Eldoret na pia Nakuru, na baadhi pia ya wale ambao wamezungumza kutoka ule ukumbi ambao tunao hapa, kuna hisia kwamba huu mswada huenda ukawa ni mzuri sana. Mawazo mengine hapa huenda yakawa ni mazuri sana, lakini huu sio wakati wa kutekeleza baadhi ya masuala kutokana na hali mbaya ya kiuchumi. Wasema namna gani Mheshimiwa?
Kwanza asante sana kwa kutupea nafasi this opportunity, and also and especially for arranging a situation where we are listening to the Kenyan people in different studios, as we have seen, and from different areas. But I want to first say that whatever we are discussing, and especially in regards to finance bill, Kenya is a very consultative country. Consultation in Kenya is actually based in the constitution itself in regards to the preeminence given to public participation. What we have and we are discussing currently is a draft that has come from the National Treasury and the Executive. It is now going through the normal processes. Normal processes, including this one, is a process where we are listening to the Kenyan people. We have had public participation running for the last two weeks. And even what we are doing today in this studio is actually public participation, because we are leaders, we are listening. And therefore, the substantive finance bill will be the one that will pass through the processes of Parliament and all the processes, including public participation. And I want to assure the Kenyan people that for the last 2 weeks, the process that has been ongoing of taking their opinions, all those opinions, I can assure them, will be incorporated. Even in this studio, what we are listening and hearing from the Kenyan people, we are not leading ourselves. We lead the Kenyan people. However, allow me to say this. One, as we discuss the finance bill, it is important for us to understand the context. Finance bill, and let me actually use the basis of Parliament. We have the Finance Committee and we have the Debt and Privatization Committee. These are the committees that deal with the revenue side of budget, with the supply side of money. You cannot talk about supply side of money with the exemption of talking about the expenditure side, because you collect money not to keep, you collect money to expend.
Okay.
And in that context, allow me, because I was actually late because I was tabling the report for the budget estimates, which is actually being debated in the House now. Allow me a minute so that we put all this into context of the finance bill and the estimates, which is the expenditure side. On the side of revenue, we are reading a 3.679 trillion budget in Kenya for the financial year 2023-2024. Out of that budget, 2.57 trillion Kenya shillings is coming from what we call ordinary revenue. 347 billion Kenya shillings is coming into what we call A&A. That is the money the government agencies collect and spend at source. We are anticipating to get around 42 billion Kenya shillings in terms of grants. And lastly, whatever remains there is now the deficit. The deficit currently is around 718 billion Kenya shillings. Now, to put it into context, this money which we are collecting or anticipating to collect, what are we expending on? 1.6 trillion Kenya shillings, 1.5 to 1.6 trillion Kenya shillings is going into national government recurrent. 720 approximately is going into development expenditure in regards to national government. 986 billion is going into something called CFS. CFS is Consolidated Fund Services, where we draw money to pay debts, we draw money to pay pensions. And then 385 billion is going as equitable shares to counties. Why have I put all this bare? I've put all this bare now to go to Mwananchi. Niacha hiyo kizungu mingi. We are allocating 630 billion Kenya shillings into education. Masomo ile tunalipia 630 billion sio ya watu ambao wako hapa sana sana, ni ya dada zetu na kaka zetu, na lazima tushikane sisi wote, kila mtu aende shule. Out of that 630 billion Kenya shillings, we are doubling money for capitation of JSS in this current budget in relation to now the finance. You know, the finance bill is the one financing the things I'm talking about. We have allocated help money. We have doubled this financial year which we are exiting, allocated 15 billion in terms of help. We have now allocated 30 billion. We have doubled the allocation of help. We have allocated money for our KMTCs. Okay. We have allocated money for fertilizer subsidy. We have allocated money for roads alone. We have commitments of road of 700 billion after scaling down and rationalizing. In this budget, we are allocating 249 billion Kenya shillings into our roads. And we are not allocating to new roads, ongoing roads. Okay. Why am I talking all these issues? As we talk about collection, I think it will be very responsible for us also as leaders to also tell Kenyans, as we collect this money, what is it for? If we had time, I would have enumerated how much is going into health, okay, how much is going into power, because into that context, then we understand.
Okay, thank you. Piers Hinga, hearing from the wide array of views, especially from Kisumu and in the county of Uasin Gishu, the common denominator, and also as mentioned by Ndindi Nyoro, is the aspect about money. Tell the Kenyan people, and you have previously said so, you're on record for doing so, Piers Hinga, that this money will not go into the consolidated fund. Is it?
No.
Okay, and if it doesn't go into the consolidated fund, which is procedural, as the PFM Act inscribes in the Constitution, where will this fund go?
It's going to a special fund that is created under the Housing Act, and it is going to be administered as per the regulations which are going to be published immediately after this statute is formed. You know, it's very, very important to understand that you can never publish regulations before you complete the statute. All the questions that you are asking about who is going to administer the fund and the management of the fund is contained in the regulations. The safety guard for Kenyans, and this is important for them to understand, is that when you read the last part of that section 76 of the finance bill, it says that the fund will not be operationalized until the regulations are in place. The regulations themselves go through a public participation process of its own. Okay? It will be published 2 weeks. We will go to all other parts of the country. We will explain about the regulations. So when you confer with our legal people, we said, why can't we just release these regulations? Because they are the ones that are explaining the many questions that are being asked. Unfortunately, you cannot publish regulations before the statute is done, because regulations can never amend a statute. But I just want to say a couple of things, because there's a lot of things that have been said. Okay. And so this is a very healthy debate. And first of all, I just really want to appreciate the fact that we have actually made shelter to be where it should be. Because first of all, this is a human right. Our own constitution actually accords that right. Article 21, let me read this, because I got in and I had some of my friend Kwame make some comments which I like to dispute. There is a section, Article 21 of the Constitution, that deals with implementation of rights and fundamental freedoms. And allow me to read verbatim. 1, it says, it is a fundamental duty of the state and every state organ to observe, respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights and fundamental freedoms in the Bill of Rights. But 2, this is important, it says, the state shall take legislative, policy, and other measures, including the setting of standards to achieve the progressive realization of the rights guaranteed under Article 43. And the last part that I'd like to read on that is 3. It says, all state organs and all public officers have the duty to address the needs of vulnerable groups within the society, including women, older members of society, persons with disability, children, youth, members of minority or marginalized communities. I dare say that today the most marginalized person in Kenya is the urban poor. Why? The urban poor lives in a 10 square feet home with a family. The urban poor pays to use a toilet. The urban poor pays 172% more for water than you and I pay. They pay 147% more for electricity than you and I. It is a constitutional imperative. We have been given jobs to fulfill those responsibilities, as the article has said. So I think there has got to be an element of balance. Now, one of the things that makes this conversation, I think it makes it interesting, but on the same time disingenuous, is because I listened to my good friend, the former member of
Jude Njomo.
MP Jude Njomo. Jude Njomo was in Jubilee government, which I was in. We passed the same bill, and I'm sure he voted for it, verbatim. The only difference between this bill and what was passed during the Jubilee government was that was 1.5%, now it is 3%. And that is the biggest challenge, because the people who are supposed to be actually out there educating our people, because this housing issue is a collective responsibility. It is our responsibility. We cannot say that we are not your brother's keeper, because that one person who has to sleep, you know. So I think that is very important. There are a couple of things I would like to respond to Kwame, but I hope you'll get a chance to do that.
Utapata nafasi bila shaka, lakini wakati huu tungependa tufike kwake waziri wa masuala ya biashara na uwekezaji Moses Kuria akijiunga nasi kutoka kule Belarus. Na kuna masuala mawili ambayo ningependa waziri waweze kuyashughulikia. Swali la kwanza ni la huyu mbunge wa zamani wa Kiambu Jude Njomo. Amezungumzia kuhusiana na miradi hii ambayo inaendeshwa na serikali, ukiwemo huu mradi wa nyumba. Utaleta faida ndio kwa ajira za moja kwa moja kwa wale vijana ndio, lakini nyumba za kienyeji zenyewe zikisha, kisha itakuwa nini? Wale vijana watelekea wapi? Akatoa mfano wa SGR, akatoa mfano wa barabara ambazo zimekuwa zikijengwa. Zikiisha, wale vijana ambao wamekuwa kihusika pale watelekea wapi? Na pia swali la pili ambalo lahusiana na hili lake Jude ni kuhusiana na lile ambalo Kwame ameliuliza. Huenda swala hili la sukumwa zaidi ili kuweza kuwafaidi wale watu ambao tayari wameshaambiwa kwamba tenda zipo, ujenzi wa nyumba upo. Mpango huu wa kuleta hii fund pamoja, hizi pesa ambazo za kusanywa kutoka kwa Kenya za kusanywa ili kuhakikishia wawekezaji pesa zao ambazo watazipata wakijenga hizo nyumba, lakini sio kumfaidi yule mwananchi moja kwa moja. Mheshimiwa Kuria.
Mara mwisho niliacha Jude Njomo kwa mtu anafikiria timamu. Sijui nini imebadilika. Bila natuambia ni kwamba tusikule leo sababu kesho asubuhi tutaamka njaa. Yaani afadhali tukose kabisa, kwa sababu kesho asubuhi kwa nini unakula na kesho asubuhi unaamka hauna chakula? Si hiyo ni fikira ina gani bwana? Ya pili, ndio nimesema ya kwamba lazima magavana wetu, na narudia pale pale, lazima magavana wetu 47 wakuwe washirika wa serikali katika huu mradi. Kwa nini nasema hivyo? Ni kwa sababu kama gavana wa Jude Njomo pale Kiambu anaitwa Kimani Wamatangi ataingilia huu mpango, ni kazi ya huyo gavana. Tuko tayari kama serikali, tuko tayari kuhusisha magavana wote wa serikali, wa upinzani, wakuu wa shirika wetu, ndio waseme kwa nini huu mwekezaji amekuja na watu kutoka nje. Wiki iliyopita tulikuwa huko Embu na gavana Cecily Mbarire, na niliongea na mwekezaji ambao tulikuwa tunazidua mpango huko. Na mwekezaji anamuuliza, wewe utaleta watu wa kufanya kazi katika hii mradi kutoka nje? Akasema nikifanya hivyo gavana Cecily Mbarire atanichapa kiboko. Kwa hivyo mimi nataka kusema hivyo, kuliko kukaa mbali unatoa kuingilia mpango, si gavana aingie kwa mpango, asema mimi ndio nitahakikisha kwamba wafanyakazi wangu, vijana wangu ndio watapata ajira hapa. Jamani, wiki iliyopita nilikuwa na mkutano pale Nairobi na mawaziri wote 54 wa biashara katika Afrika. Na nikaweza kuongea na waziri mmoja kutoka nje ya Algeria. Akaniambia katika miaka 10 iliyopita wamejenga manyumba milioni 5. Na ni kwa sababu waliona wasipofanya hivyo muda unaenda na hakutakuwa na wakati wa majibizano. Nchi inaitwa Singapore. Siku moja Singapore ilikuwa salama. ilikuwa kitongoji, ilikuwa duni zaidi kuliko Kibra. Leo hii kila mtu anasifu Singapore. Ni kwa sababu Singapore walichukua hatua, na sisi sasa tuko miaka 60 nyuma ya Singapore katika mradi wa makao, na bado watu wanatuambia hapana, goja, wakati hujafaa, kuna wakati mzuri. Sasa kama Singapore wakigojea, jamani, mimi nakwambia yule jamaa ameongea kutoka Kisumu, nimemsikia Okia, anaitwa Okia huyo, mambo mawili. Kwanza, na vile hata nyinyi mmekadiria, huyu jamaa hajasoma hii mswada, amesikiza vile wanasiasa wengine wanasema. Ya pili, huyu jamaa kwa maoni yangu hata pesa lipo hana. Okia bwana, sio wewe tunalenga bwana, tunalenga matajiri bao hapo ambao 2500 kwao sio kitu. 2500 ni kitu, unaenda kwa bao na kunywa pombe siku moja. Hao ndio tunalenga, sio wewe. Sasa wewe unapigia makofi watu wengine hapo bwana, ambao wanakunywa whisky chupa moja, ambao wewe kwako inaweza kuwa ajira. Kwa mimi sijaona nchi ambao wale watu wanasaidika wachache. Na nasema hivi kwa sababu mimi mtu kama mimi Moses Kuria, ambao tumeajiriwa na serikali, tuko watu milioni 1. Wale watu ambao wameajiriwa kwa sekta ya kibinafsi ni watu milioni 2. Hesabu sasa tuko milioni 3. Wale watu ambao wako na kapahali wanaraukia kila siku, iwe ni kibanda, iwe ni soko, iwe ni kwa mechanic, ni watu milioni 6. Kuna watu wengine hapo milioni 10 ambao hata hawana pahali ya kurauka. Hao ndio tunalenga, na hao ndio tunataka kupatia ajira. Sasa wale watu wako kwa serikali na sekta ya kibinafsi ambao wako na tai kama mimi na mshahara ni milioni 3.
Okay.
Hao wengine wote ambao wamefikisha miaka kufanya kazi ni milioni 16. Mimi nasema nataka kidogo kuumiza hao milioni 3 ndio ni faida hao wengine 16.
Okay.
Sasa 16 anapiga makofi Ukia pale Kisumu.
Okay.
Hapana. Sasa mimi sijui kuroa ama ni nini.
Okay,
so kwa hivyo mimi nasema hivi.
Okay, CS Kuria, to just pause you, let me just pause you because you haven't definitively answered the question by my colleague here, and it was on the employment. You have talked about those who are unemployed. His question was very clear, CS, and it just wants a straightforward answer. What happens to those who will be employed as a result of this housing program? For example, to give you this, if someone is aged 18 and after 7 years he is 25, what then happens after this housing project? What will happen to that person who you have employed?
I'll tell you something. I am the Minister for Industry, my friend. As a Minister for Industry, I will tell you the amount of industrialization that will be spurred by this project. Wawekezaji katika upande wa manufacturing ambao watafungua viwanda kwa sababu ya hii mradi, wawe ni watu wa misumari, watu wa chuma, watu wa industry tofauti ambao zitawekwa. Baada ya hii mradi, hawa wawekezaji wataendelea kuajiri watu kazi. Kwa sababu gani? Watasema sasa tuko hapa, ile bidhaa ilikuwa inaagizwa kutoka nje, tutaendelea kufanya kazi. So hii ni ile tunaita stimulus. Hii ni kama gari imekwama, vile gari inakuamulika. Lakini hiyo ni lugha ngumu kwa George Jomo kuelewa, kwa hivyo acha tuache vile nitasema ya kwamba.
Okay, I'll pause this. Yes, you will proceed because we also have the chair of the Finance and National Planning Committee of the National Assembly, Kuria Kimani, with us in studio, and also David Ocheng. I'll come back to you. But Sam Gituku is standing by the magic wall that is populated with data of how these things practically look like. Sam, what do you have for us?
All right. You had the conversation, the contribution from the CS for MITI, that is Moses Kuria. He's comparing Kenya to Singapore. Let us just contextualize what this means. Singapore, for instance, the geographical size is 710 square kilometers. Kenya is 582,000 square kilometers. So if you have to compare the size, Singapore is close to the city of Nairobi, Nairobi City County. In terms of population, this is how they compare. In Singapore, there are 5.4 million people, according to the numbers in 2022. Nairobi, based on the current estimates from the Economic Survey 2023, it talks about 4.7 million people by day, the population of Nairobi. Kenya, 51 million is the estimate, according to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. So you see that difference in terms of the geographical size and the population. But back to here with our experts. Honorable Bill Okero, a former senator, and of course, even was a shadow minister in matters finance during the Moi regime. When you listen to all these conversations, saying the people in Kisumu saying we have not been informed enough, the contributions from the government representatives are saying that this is a special fund, it is not part of consolidated fund. This is not a tax, this is a patriotism expression to support those at the bottom of the pyramid. What is the right thing to do? And especially now that you're still waiting for the report to be tabled, what is the right thing to do for Parliament at this point in time?
The right thing to do for the government right now is to withdraw that bill, the finance, that provision for the housing fund in the finance bill. And for all the reasons that have been given, because this fund, there's no clarity exactly what is this fund. Depends on whom you listen to in government. It is a patriotism story, it is a housing story, it is an employment creation, it sounds, the more you listen to it, is an investors coming in. The more you listen to it, you start getting worried. It is a Ponzi scheme. Because where is the investor? There's no investor in this thing. We are putting our money, 9 billion a month. And your government is getting a contractor to put up the house. The government is providing the land. Where is the investor coming in? I think the issue for this government, the challenge we have in this country is that is one of about priorities. If this, in fact, is a priority, which is not, and people talked about jobs and food security and many other issues, but if it was, what the government needed to have done is to have the actual procedure for doing this kind of thing. You do policy first, you do legislation, then you come to execution of the fund. That is the procedure. What I see is putting the horse, the cart before the horse. You're asking us, bring the money. Once we start collecting the money, after the bill passes, then we start doing the law. I mean, you guys can then give your views. I think it's a very wrong thing, and I think the point really many Kenyans have raised is this: true, we are entitled to housing, but the government has a mandate. Mm-hmm. The government is not short of money. You collect 3.6 trillion expenditure. You have that's what Ndindi Nyoro said. 3.6 trillion. You cannot spend 100 billion to house Kenyans whom you say are vulnerable. Is that a challenge? You are, what I think for me, if you ask me what the government needs to do after withdrawing that bill, create a conducive environment for investors to do the work. Housing should not be a responsibility of government, in my view. If at all the government wants to do something about houses, provide a cheap mortgage. You have done it in the Hustlers Fund, provide it. Provide a guarantee to the financial institutions, and complement, so that you can give a cheap mortgage. The same way when we started Agricultural Finance Corporation, you remember the AFC, that bank, we had banks that have been started by government, right, to assist in this kind of things. Start a fund. I mean, the government can assist in that kind of situation where they can assist on the mortgage, those who cannot afford. But I think for the government to start looking for a contractor, take our money, build houses, there is a trust deficit in this country about government. No one trusts the government of the Republic of Kenya with their money. Forget about our fund money, which they're going to deduct from me and from you. Nobody trusts them with the tax 3.6 trillion that they collect. They have gone on record as government officials and said a third of this money is stolen. This particular government, their leader, their chair of their Council of Economic Advisors on record that corruption is not on their platform. I mean, what are you telling Kenyans?
Okay.
I give you my money.
Even though, Honorable Okero, the tax collected is just over 2 trillion shillings, not exactly 3.6.
No, the expenditure is 3.6 trillion.
Yes, the expenditure, yes.
Yeah.
John, nafikiri umeweza kusikiza kauli za viongozi wa serikali, na mara nyingi inatokea kwamba inachukuliwa dhana kwamba Wakenya wanatengeza pesa nyingi, wana mishahara mikubwa. Utafiti umefanywa mara kwa mara, ukiangalia wale hata wenye akaunti kwenye benki ni wachache. Walioko pengine na 100,000 au shilingi 50,000 ni wachache. Chukulia mfano wala wanatubeba kwenye taxi. Utakuta siku zote wanalia kwamba yale mapato na ubaki nao kwa siku pengine shilingi 500 kwa sababu nimelipia gharama ya mafuta, nimelipia gharama ya kumlipa mwenyewe na yule yuko kwenye ajira. Ikiwa kwa wiki yule anatengeza shilingi 3,500 kutokana na faida ya kutembeza watu ama kubeba watu. Vipi iweje iwe rahisi kwa serikali kusema kumkata shilingi 2,500 si kitu kikubwa? John.
Asante Nimrod. I think it's important for us to contextualize what this finance bill is really going for. In terms of, I think what Honorable Ndindi Nyoro actually led us towards, which is to look at it also from the perspective of the fact that we are trying to fund a budget. When you look at the amount of revenue that this finance bill is targeting to collect, is about 289 billion shillings. Right, so that's the additional revenue that the government is planning to collect from the different revenue adjustments that are being proposed in it. If you look at 2022, the finance bill then was aiming to collect about 50 billion shillings. So you can see the shift is quite significant. And when you think about it, it's almost, there's almost a nuance here that what we are dealing with is a revenue problem. We need to collect more, because that's how we are going to solve the kind of economic challenges we are in right now, the kind of cash flow problems that the government has been facing. But when you think, because history is a good reminder of why we are here, the reason why we are here is not necessarily because we are really struggling with a revenue problem. If you look at the Central Bank of Kenya, it has a lot of data that go back to more than 20 years ago. If you look at what got us into the problems we are in right now, is the fact that at some point our expenditure got too adventurous. Our expenditure was growing at a faster rate than the rate at which the revenue was growing. And the revenue was not growing at a shabby level, because our revenue was growing by more than 10%, with the exception of the years when we had COVID. So when you come back to the finance bill, it seems to be trying to solve the problem we are in by collecting a lot more and try to catch up with expenditure, rather than try and also tighten our belts around our expenditure. So the government is basically telling us with this finance bill that you as Kenyans, we need to tighten our belts. Fair. That's good. But then is the government tightening its belt? And I think that comes back to the conversation around all this public participation that we've been doing. A lot of the language has really been cultured around we need to collect more. Kenya is not taxed like other countries. We need to generate more revenue. But there is very little talk, and which for me should be the first justification that comes with this finance bill, on how is the government tightening its belt. Because when you look at the budget, as Honorable Ndindi Nyoro said, it's actually going up. Right? If you compare to the previous year, the budget is going up, interestingly, by an amount almost equal to the 289 billion shillings that the finance bill is trying to collect. So when we, listen and look at the finance bill, let's look at it in the broader sense of where we are as a country, not just about the proposal it's making right now. Okay. Because if we don't solve the expenditure challenge that we have, the prioritization challenge that we have, no matter how much revenue we try to raise with this finance bill, we're not going to get out of the mess that we are in.
Right. And Molen, former senator raises an important question about you just need about 100 billion shillings from the tax revenue that we collect to go into such a program. Is the situation so bad to an extent that now we have to start spending money outside the budget, especially if it talks about such a fund?
I don't think the situation is so bad. And I want to agree with my colleague here that we have a problem with the expenditure side of our budget. Our revenue is okay because taxpayers have been pushed to the limit. If you see what KRA has done in the last financial year, they have been too much pushed to collect revenue, and businesses have been crying. So the thing is that we need to put austerity measures now again towards the expenditure side of the budget. Can we look at that expenditure side and see what we can seed ground on? Because I think it's just a question of priorities. What are we going to drop now so that we can do it in future?
Kwame, Piers Hinga responds to your submissions. He is quite... he doesn't agree. He disputes what you're saying. And he goes ahead to quote the Constitution on the responsibility that the government has. Is there a different way of doing this?
Yes.
And especially at a time that, yes, you're talking about those employed in formal sector, 16 million, formal sector, 3.2 million, and those that are in the formal sector are actually feeling this burden. Is there a different way of doing it?
Yes. So let's start with the fact that, look, I think we must respect the Constitution enough to understand that the Constitution was built for people and not the reverse. So the Constitution also says that we have a right to families, partners, and everything else. It doesn't mean the government has a bureau or a fund for us to form families, right? And I mean that as a joke, but I say if we start to debate the way we are debating, we can get to a but there is. The view for me is this. I think P.S. Hinga makes an eloquent case for the fact that there are poor people or people who are disadvantaged, who are not sitting here, who need to be helped. The weak case is that we need to do it through a fund and have you people manage it, and we don't trust you. So if government wanted to, and simply say, look, it's okay. Simply say, in the same way that we have the same tax finance bill that we're discussing, saying that anybody who wants 500,000 shillings and above will have 1,000 shillings, we have the National Housing Corporation, whose work is exactly this. Simply make this simple. Rules of taxation require that they be simple and direct. Simply add an additional 1 percentage point and fill P.S. Hinga's pot and use it to fund the National Housing Corporation. And we'll be honest with each other and account for those as a way of it. There's an obsession in this new Kenya Kwanza government with funds and forming funds here and there and earmarks on the budgets and everything else. So I think if you did that, it's a simple way. You can simply get that money. We can debate whether you should or not, but you simply have one single. But this idea of driving a wedge between employers and their employees by saying on TV, it's embarrassing for a public sector worker to say we are stealing from your employers to pay you our houses. You see, we are driving ourselves in knots by saying many things. So yes, because you asked me for an alternative, an alternative exists. You simply say that we will have a specific charge, and instead of making it go to a fund, you simply push it back to the National Housing Corporation, which is already a fund by the, because it's established by law, and use that money to then execute whatever housing policy we want to. But what we have here suggests to me, and all those promises that we're being told, let me finish with this. With all due respect, Honorable P.S. Hinga and Honorable Moses Kuria, the jobs you're promising will not come. Let me tell you why. According to the National Bureau Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which does better data collection than some have had people cite here, there are 14 million households in Kenya. If 14 million households have not created that burst in jobs that you have, why do these guys think that creating 250,000 in 1 year will create those jobs? You are lying to us. So that's it. There's no economics rule that tells you that if you can't create millions from 14 million, you're going to suddenly have some magic. I mean, they're telling us that they have a magic pot that they're going to start called the Housing Levy Development Fund that will do it. It's not going to do it, and I can bet any amount of money that it won't. Let's have a honest conversation here.
Okay. All right. Of course, the question of unemployment is huge. Many professions of people that haven't found work since finishing school. We cross over to the town hall where Rashid and Trevor are still on standby.
Well, thank you, Sam and Nimrod there. Jude Jomo is with us still. We'll give him a chance to respond. But let me bring in Zura. If you can pass the microphone to Zura Ogada there from MSK first. Zura, having heard what the government has said, are you now convinced that this housing levy is a good idea?
Thank you, Trevor. I've heard what the government has said, and sitting here as the chair of the Marketing Society of Kenya, we are the force behind business. We already are seeing how for the last, since COVID, the marketing industry has seen a negative 40% decline in the industry on revenue that we are seeing on our clause 10 and 24, where we are looking at more taxation that is going to be put in the industry. This is the industry that if you want to sell product, the private sector relies on this industry to ensure that we are making profits to even employ more and more people. Now, we are seeing an aspect of joblessness that's going to occur in this industry. We've seen redundant exercises that have even been done in the advertising world. We've seen media houses that have actually been affected since COVID time and to this particular time. Now, how do we expect to market? Because the first thing people do, it's a marketing department that organizations use to cut budget. The moment that is cut, then organizations are going to look for cheaper ways to advertise. They're also going to look for cheaper ways, maybe not advertise. And some of the cheaper ways is even going onto the digital platform. When they go to the digital platform, where does that money go? The money doesn't stay in the country. So where is the impact of all this? What about the opportunities that are there? That we look at advertising that is actually starring the economic angle across different counties, whether it's on the billboards, whether it's the different people that we employ across to be able to ensure that the products are out there. So even as we look at this and we're talking about the housing levy, I love the opportunity that is there for housing. yes, it's a dream, as we say, but right now, where are we looking at? Where is the market? How are the businesses going to survive? Okay. Because we need to, the businesses need to rely on us to be able to prosper, and then we can be able to then look at where do we save and how much can we be able to put out there. So we need to really look at that, and we thank the government that they've been able to give us data connectivity, and I know we have an issue again on the content creators, who of course a lot of organizations use them as influencers, but again you look at them, they're a percentage compared to the population that we have, so even the impact will not be there. So we are looking at working together, yes, with government, but where are we in a situation right now?
All right, let me bring in Anthony Manyara on this. And Anthony, from the University Students Leaders Association, is this a good idea or a bad idea?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Since I've seen time exactly short here, I'll just be as brief as a cock on a hen. I think the matter about affordable housing, it is a matter which has affected university students a lot. If you look at all the institutions that we have in the country, over 73% of university students, they live in places, in slums, areas that we cannot really rely on. We just want to see whether those institutions, they can be able to donate the virgin land that they have, so that they can be, so that we can have affordable accommodation. Personally, I'm a graduate architect. I have a firm background on affordable housing, low-cost housing, and also sustainable buildings. What we are just requesting the government, because we saw even President Ruto the other day, he's saying that he is looking forward to see how he can assist the undignified people. Now, if you look at the situation about students, they are on the receiving end. There are people who are suffering the most. And they live in slums. Some of them live on the streets. In fact, these students, most of them are exposed on rape cases, deaths, and some of them live in very severe conditions. All we want is incorporation of affordable student accommodation in the national platform of having affordable housing. Now we are seeing this because we have seen even TVET institutions. There are so many. We have 65 universities. Some of those institutions, the hostels they have, if you look at the rooms that the students stay, they look like toilets. They are very small. And what we want is how we can be able to incorporate affordable housing for students, similar to Germany, similar to Sweden, similar to United Kingdom, so that at least we can be able to afford students a basic place to stay. And just to end on that, I will just say Kenyans need to be serious. We're not supposed to bury our hands in the sand like the proverbial ostrich. We're supposed to be objective. We're supposed to see beyond the nose, because this affordable housing is coming to assist. And because we know students may not be really incorporated. In fact, students are really contributing nothing. So what we want, na ile pesa ambayo watu wa chini wanaitishwa, hata iwezi fika pesa ya mzinga, ya Gilbis. So we just want they contribute that small thing. Hiyo pesa itolewe kidogo, and then we have stakeholders from the private sector, public sector, they contribute. We see how we can be able to afford students a better place to stay. Thank you.
Shukrani za kupitisha kwa Jude kidogo, maana yake nafikiri kwa kuna swali labda kabla mweze kuchangia, mtachangia nyote. Kuna hoja imeletwa na waziri kule, hususan kwako, kwamba miaka miwili ama mwaka mmoja iliyopita ulikuwa unaimba wimbo tofauti. Sasa hivi unaimba wimbo tofauti. Ni kutoka kwa nafsi yako ama kuna msukumo kutoka mahali fulani?
Ningependa kurudia vile nilisema hapo mwanzo. Nikasema hili doto la nyumba ni doto mzuri, lakini process ile inafuatwa kupata hizi nyumba ndio iko na swali, ndio iko na shida. Na mwenzangu kutoka Eldoret pia akakuja pale akasema pia wakati wake uko na shida kwa sababu ya pahali economy ya nchi imefika. Hiyo ndio pahali ambayo tuko sasa. Na ya tatu, watu hawajaelewa kitu, hawatajaelewa hii maneno. Bwana Hinga PS amesema kuwa legislation ndio inafanywa saa hii, lakini regulations hazijafanywa. Hata kabla regulations hazijafanywa, wananchi wanataka kujua. Mimi kwa sababu nimetoa 3% na mwajiri wangu ametoa 3%. Hii pesa itanisaidia namna gani? Ni taratibu gani? If you look at our country, our cooperative movement is one of the most successful cooperative movements in the world. Kwa sababu mpaka mwananchi, mpaka mkulima yule yako pale chini anaelewa cooperative inaenda namna gani. Hii ni kitu mpya tunajua, tumeletewa, hatujui kama ni tax, hatujui kama ni kitu ya kufosiwa, hatujui kama iko na interest. We need a lot of details tuweze kuielewa. Ya pili, Bwana Ndindi Nyoro ameongea hapa na akatuambia vile tutafanya. Wewe kama unapata mshahara yako ya shilingi 20, utatoa 3% ya hiyo shilingi 20,000. Kama unapata shilingi 10,000 unapata 3%. Lakini Bwana Ndindi Nyoro kwa mshahara yake mkubwa, yeye atatoa 2,500. Ukicalculate kutoka kwa mshahara yake ile tunasoma kwa magazeti, that is 0.25% ya mshahara wake. Ukiweka ya Bwana Moses Kuria, yule amesema asijui ati kichwa yangu ilikuwa mzuri, sasa imeharibika. Na hiyo kichwa imeharibika ndio inafanya hesabu, inaniambia yeye kutoa 0.25% na mimi ambaye niko na mshahara wa 20,000 kutoa 3%. That is not fair. Yule mtu ambaye ako na pesa kidogo ndiye anatoa percentage kubwa, yule ambaye ako na mshahara kubwa anatoa percentage kidogo hata haijafika 1%. Kama hii kitu ni ya kusaidia, wacha isaidia across the board. Ya pili, hata kwa hii the same thing has happened kwa hii inaitwa turnover tax. Hapo awali wale walikuwa wanatoa turnover tax ni yule akona kutoka turnover ya 1 million shillings per year mpaka 50 million shillings per year. Serikali kaona sasa inataka kuhusisha watu wengi zaidi ili waweze kutoa pesa ikuwe mingi tujenge nchi. So ikateremsha chini ikaleta 500,000. Lakini pande ya juu ikateremsha kutoka 50,000 ikaleta 15,000. Sasa yule ako na 500,000 na usione kama 500,000 ni pesa mingi. Ukifanya hesabu unahitaji tu kuwa una collect, sio faida, una collect 1,388 shillings per day. Kama unachukua hiyo kwa boda yako, ukiuza boga za 1,388 ujue utalipa 3% ya hiyo pesa. Whether umetengeneza faida au hujatengeneza. Lakini yule ambaye anatengeneza 50 million per year, na 50 million yule mtu ana bank 166,666. Huyo sasa ametolewa, imeteremshwa. Kwa nini tuna narrow brackets pande ya chini ya yule anaguzwa zaidi, yule ambaye hana pesa? Wacha tukifanya mambo, let it affect watu wote. Yule mtu ananunua Probox alipe tax, yule ananunua helicopter alipe tax.
Naam, shukran sana John Jomo. Nafikiri kuna mengi na kuna wadau watakuzungumza kutoka sekta tofauti tofauti. Nataka tuweze kuchukua mapumziko mafupi, lakini tukirudi tutazungumza, maana kumbuka kwamba kuna swala zima la pia vile gharama ya maisha ambayo imepanda, kuna swala zima la gharama ya kuendesha biashara, na tukimalizia masuala ya ushuru wa nyumba. Kwa nafikiri kuna wasanii ambao wako hapa ndani, kuna wafanyabiashara wa mitumba, kuna watu wa jua kali. Tuko wengi ambao tungependa kuchangia na fursa mtaipata, lakini ni baada ya muda usio kwa mrefu.